My key takeaway would be not to panic. Get familiar with the technology available, but know where to draw the line. Because as we said, there's so much more that we can do with AI, but just bear in mind that there's also a fine line on where to use it and where it's not okay to use it for a number of reasons, both ethical concerns, but also because it might impact the trust of your customers towards you. So yeah, don't panic and try to experiment with what you have available. I'm Giulia Panozzo, and this is SEO in 2026.
Julia, what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
My number one SEO tip is turn AI into your partner, not your problem.
Turn AI into your partner. So how do you do that? And how do you know when your partner is becoming too much?
Yeah, I think that's actually a great question. I think the industry as a whole has been panicking a little ever since, obviously, the AI revolution has taken over our industry. So there's been quite a lot of conversation that we've seen around about AI taking over, our jobs and replacing us. And I don't think we're there yet. I don't know if we'll ever get there because I think we have some aces up our sleeves as well. So the way that you turn AI into your partner is by knowing exactly where to use it versus where not to use it.
So humans have aces up our sleeves. So what are the aces that the humans have?
So, well, we know that, for example, AI is really great at picking up, content and summarizing it, finding insights, but still it lacks context most of the time. So it's still something that we need to provide with the data sets that we're analyzing. But I think the most powerful, let's say, ace up our sleeve as humans is the fact that we can actually tell when we're seeing AI versus when we're interacting with a human. And there's been many studies that have shown that, especially when we know that we're interacting with AI, we're much more diffident. Whereas when we don't know that we're interacting with AI, we tend to still try to find those human sides of AI to be able to connect with it. So I think we can take a step backwards here and see what my study has shown, because I've done a study myself to figure out, if humans can actually have an edge over AI, because I was hearing so many conversations on AI is going to take our jobs, humans will not be able to recognize. And this was particularly true, I think, last year. So I was like, you know what, I'm a woman of science. I want to figure out myself if that's the case, because for me, I think the human edge will always prevail.
Always. Okay, so you don't think that, you think that humans can obviously tell AI now. Do you not think there's a time at some point, X years into the future, that humans won't be able to tell?
I think there might be an age where we won't be able to tell, but I feel like at the moment we're giving so much credit to AI, but not giving too much credit to ourselves, which is historically, we have a very good track record of adapting to new revolutions and to use them to our advantage. I'm not saying that that's always going to be the case, because we've also seen history repeating in other ways that are not great for human history. However, I do feel like we have, and I think this is something that I touched on before in my previous tip, we have neuroplasticity as our human superpower, which is our brain adapts to what we expose it to. So the more we're exposed to AI, the more we'll be discernant of it, especially if, we're exposed to it every day. This is something actually that has been noticed in other studies as well, and something that I've banged my head on when I did my own study, because what I thought I was going to see was essentially a human detector for AI, in the sense that we have a different reaction for AI stimuli versus human stimuli based on the fact that we detect this AI stimuli as something strange, something that we're not used to. However, what I noticed was something opposite. It was like a heightened response for the human component, which when I then went to, try to explain it, I found more literature covering how currently we're not able to replicate the studies that I based my entire experiment on, which were studies on the uncanny valley. So our the negative feeling that we experience when we see something that's almost human, but not quite. And more recent studies have seen how that component that we don't almost respond to anymore because we're so used to something that's imitating human life and human appearances that now it's almost the subtler differences that we can distinguish something non-human for. So it's a very convoluted way to essentially say, I think we're going to always have an edge because although the progress is very fast, I think we might be a step behind, but we do have the capacity of adapting to it and learning and finding new patterns and responding to these new outliers.
So you say that AI has massive limitations still. So how would you briefly summarize those current limitations?
Yes, we've seen, all kind of hallucinations still. I think where I've seen the most limitations, it's been in not taking context as part of the output that we try to get it out of it. So, for example, I was speaking just yesterday with somebody who will be speaking at Brighton SEO. So they were walking me through their decks, and their decks it was about creating an intent machine, an intent detector machine. So essentially bringing all of these data from the SERP and from internal databases, bringing them together to find what the intent of the user is. And I think that's a great, use for it. For what they explained to me was that anyway, the prompt needed to be tweaked several times to get something that was usable because obviously they needed to put their own expertise to it, what the intent what the intent categories that they wanted to extract were. So there were a number of human inputs that the AI could not get itself. And I feel like obviously there's another sort of limitation right now, which is the ethical implications of the misuse of AI. I don't think that's something that a lot of companies might think about because they're blinded by the scalability potential. But this is something that has massive implication, not only, of course, because it's not right to try and deceive or to try and put a fake influencer, right, to tell your story, but also because we're naturally more diffident towards something that's AI based. Therefore, it's a double-edged sword. Businesses that might use AI to scale, for example, human-generated content by faking it are actually damaging their own brand and their own authenticity, which is what humans crave in order to connect with a brand and in order to purchase from them.
Your article on Search Engine Journal says, or is headlined, "This is why AI won't take your job," in brackets yet. But do you not think it's the case that AI will take some jobs unless SEOs change the way that they do things, and they have to embrace AI? And if they don't embrace AI and do their jobs differently, then certain jobs may get replaced in 26.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to be there in 26. I feel like at the minute we're at this curve of adoption, which is we're at the peak almost. And I feel like a lot of businesses do think that they can replace employees with AI. And obviously there will be some functions that are massively affected because we've seen that already. For example, copywriters, sadly, or copywriting agencies, and then SEO, when we talk about SEO that's more procedural and with big data analysis, that's part of the day-to-day, those functions might get affected. However, our function as SEOs has been changing for the past year and a half already. So we should already be on a path or on a trajectory of change where we evolve in our job beyond what traditional SEO has always been about. Because, we've done it before. Again, SEO 10 years ago, SEO 5 years ago was not what it is today. So we moved on from, for example, caring about keywords and intent to now look at the entire search journey, which is, I believe, where SEO is going to go. It's no longer about search engine optimization. It's about search experience optimization, search everywhere optimization, whatever you want to call it. There's so many channels now that are part of the organic trajectory that we need to take into account, that while some functions might get replaced, I believe there's still a space for us in the industry to create our own path and really tackle these new challenges which have to do with, be present on other channels that are not necessarily, Google, and take into account the evaluation process and the continuous exploration, look that we've seen search behavior evolving to. So yes, I think maybe I am a bit of an optimist, but I really want to believe that while our job function or some of our day-to-day might change as a function of having AI at our disposal, essentially, I want to believe that there is a new place for us in the industry.
What areas of SEO should we definitely be using AI to replace at the moment?
So as I mentioned, I think AI is great to look at existing data set and new data set. So whatever was taking, a week of work now takes very little, because we can ingest great amounts of data, get insights out of that data, and with a bit of tweaks, get what we want out of it, right? So I think anything that's more on the database side. So if we want even to, for example, see the similarity between topics, see the similarity of intent, and see how these plays into, for example, creating new internal linking modules if I'm on an e-commerce site. A lot of opportunities that, were only available to a few of us before, with specialist tools that would analyze the entities of each page and then find out what the similarity was. Now we can literally do that with any kind of machine learning model. And then I would say there's so much more than we can take on. For example, I know that it's not part of the traditional SEO as we know it, but anything that streamlines the journey, anything that brings the user closer to us and that removes friction. For example, product descriptions that are based on specifications. Obviously, I will never say write all of your content with AI, but if I'm in e-commerce and I have a lot of product specifications that are just like there, sitting in the catalog, then I can feed them into a machine learning model and create content that's actually helpful for the user. A colleague of mine and I don't know if you've spoken to them already, but Miriam Jessier and I did this study back, I think it was 2023, when we looked at what are the most important parts of a product page for people to purchase something, for people to make the actual decision to purchase something. And the product description came up on top, the product specifications particularly. And sometimes they're like this gold mine that doesn't really go anywhere. But I've seen them as well, like being featured as part of the AI overviews right now. Whereas before, I didn't really pay much attention to the product descriptions themselves, because they had already, like, if you have bullet points on the product page and it's all good, right? But when they're brought up as helpful content, then they might even give you an advantage being shown on AI overviews. Then I would also like bring up, for example, the summary of real user reviews. I've seen that done on Amazon. I think everyone's familiar with that. I've seen that done on many more e-commerce sites, because people obviously want to see reviews and they want to see them from real people. But what they don't want to do, or what they might get bored with, is going through each one to see the pros and cons. So I've seen many examples of where the AI can bring in, like the best pros and the worst cons of a product, and people can make a decision much faster, because that's our challenge as SEOs and as marketers now. The fact that attention span is declining and there's so many competitors that, can potentially take your user at any point of the journey, that we want to reduce the friction to get what they want and what they need in order to convert and to trust us. So I would believe that those are the areas where SEO can really embrace AI. So anything that provides, more information, facilitate navigations, and streamline search journeys.
Giulia, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
My key takeaway would be not to panic. Get familiar with the technology available, but know where to draw the line. because as we said, there's so much more that we can do with AI, but just bear in mind that there's also a fine line on where to use it and where it's not okay to use it for a number of reasons, both ethical concerns, but also because it might impact the trust of your customers towards you. So yeah, don't panic and try to experiment with what you have available.
Giulia Panozzo is founder at Neuroscientive. Find out more over at neuroscientive.com. Giulia, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thank you so much for having me.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at SEOin2026.com.